Welcome to the podcast of the Briones Society, a political club working to make San Francisco America's greatest city. Founded by Republicans committed to expanding freedom and social mobility, the Briones Society aims to unstick the political culture of San Francisco so that its government is as effective and influential as its business and cultural entrepreneurs. Today, in our first episode, we talk to Gus Mattammal, candidate in California Congressional District 15, just south of San Francisco in San Mateo County. Gus exemplifies a new breed of Republican candidate in the Bay Area, pragmatic, inclusive, and more interested in good policy than the culture wars. We started by asking Gus to introduce himself. We started by asking Gus about, well, Gus.
My name is Gus Mattammal. I'm running as the Republican candidate in the 15th Congressional District, which runs from East Palo Alto, Redwood City, all the way up to South San Francisco, including a little tiny strip of the city of San Francisco itself. So it's an open seat. Jackie Spear is the incumbent, but she's retiring. So there are 6 candidates in it. It's going to be a wild race, and I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to help kind of lead the party out of the wilderness in this state.
Gus grew up in Missouri.
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in the inner city there. My father was an immigrant from India. My mother grew up actually on a farm in Southern Illinois. And they started at the bottom of the economic ladder. My dad worked 3 jobs, and my mother worked a full-time job and also raised 4 kids, basically on her own.
We touched briefly on how this informed his perspective on race and racism.
As I mentioned, I grew up in Missouri in the 70s and 80s, as with brown skin. I've seen real racism. I know what it looks like, and in part because when I look at what the way things are today versus the way they were then, like, it's very real to me, like how much progress we've made as a society. That, I think, is cause for optimism and hope. I think the way that you continue down that path is through patience and education, kind of conversations with people. I don't think it's Twitter mobs, and I don't think it's yelling at people. I don't think it's making people feel like they're terrible people or something, or they, inherited a terrible history or something like that.
And how about coming to California?
So I came here for college, and 32 years ago, and with a few minor windows of time when I went back east for college and for a job. I've lived here ever since because I think California is amazing, and I want to see it thrive and prosper. And I think that our party can be a big help in making that happen.
Gus on running for office. We started with what inspired him to run for office.
One summer when we were 12, we were hanging out at a friend's house, and a friend of mine named Keith was complaining about having to go to summer school for math. And even at that age, I knew I loved to teach. I loved to teach math specifically. I actually manage a private tutoring business here in the Bay Area. I kind of built it up here in the Bay Area and have since expanded it around the country. But even at that age, I already knew I loved to teach. And so I offered to tutor him basically in the math that he needed. And he looked at me and he said, "Listen, Gus, it doesn't matter how I do in the class." And that seemed surprising to me because it was those days you still held kids back if they didn't pass classes. And when I protested, he said, "Listen, you're the only one of us who's going to make it in life anyway, so it doesn't matter how I do in this class." And that conversation has really stuck with me over the years, just because, we were 12 years old. There were 4 of us there that day, and the others all nodded along. To be 12 and already convinced that the future doesn't hold any promise for you. That was my first contact with what I call the loss of faith. In that case, loss of faith in the future.
A Republican in California? Why?
That's the money question. And I think in that question is the seed of the huge opportunity that our party has going forward, which is, what I'm talking about in my campaign is how center-right policies, conservative policies that are organized around some of our goals as a party, which is kind of less government spending, more personal choice and freedom, kind of paring back some of the administrative state. There are policies we can do that are thoroughly conservative in every one of those ways, that can also achieve what are conventionally understood to be liberal goals.
How is that politically conservative?
Yeah, I view it as constructive conservatism, because you can have a conservatism that's just focused on tearing down the administrative state, right? That's sort of its goal is destructive. And I don't think that's where conservatism needs to be. I think conservatism can be constructive, meaning let's build a universal healthcare system, which, by the way, will allow us to pare back some other things. For instance, my favorite one to talk about is healthcare. There is no reason we can't have a conservative universal healthcare plan. Singapore has one that involves health savings accounts. So the money goes into the account, and then you control how that money is spent. If you want to go to the doctor, you go to the doctor, you pay for it out of your account. You need medication, you buy the medication, you pay for it out of your account. The accounts are, there's varying amounts of support in them based on, whether you're poor or more, have higher income. So there's some income tied to it. So that addresses some of the equity issue. And what they are doing is spending 1/4 of what we do on healthcare in GDP terms, while being top 3 in quality on every metric. We are spending 4 times as much. Yep, 4 times as much. And we are at or near the bottom of the OECD on every quality measure. It's not even like there's that one metric, but at least we're good at that one. We're not good at any of the things.
And why not as a Democrat?
Because I like to remind all of my liberal friends, of which I have many, because I've lived on both coasts and gone to very liberal undergraduate and very liberal graduate school. So most of my friends are quite liberal. And I love to remind them the Democratic Party has failed to deliver you universal health care for quite some time now, including times when they had the votes.
And why have the Democrats failed?
Right now in California, the state of California is a supermajority, right? The Democratic Party can pass any policy at once without consultation with us at all. And there was some talk of doing a Medicare for all style program here in California, and they just yanked it. And the reason they yanked it is that to pay for it, you would have to raise taxes by hundreds of billions of dollars. It's going to be really expensive to do that. And in a year where the Democratic Party knows that they're in some trouble in the midterms, the last thing they wanted to do was announce a gigantic tax increase. And that's how you know that particular way to get to universal health care isn't the best way, because it's going to cost so much money. They're afraid to even do it when the voters are going to notice it. So so it's I also want to see universal healthcare. I don't want people to live in fear of getting sick. Like, that's a terrible way to live, and it's not necessary in a society that's as as advanced and as wealthy as we are. But I want to get there using conservative principles, because if we do, we're going to end up spending less money. People will have more choice and freedom, and we won't need as much kind of government infrastructure to do it. So there's no reason we can't have it. It's a constructive form of conservatism that, again, achieves our goals, but also some of the goals that are, again, conventionally understood to be liberal.
Gus is an educator, so that was our first policy topic.
Education in particular is a passion of mine. So my father's from India, and in his world, there were really 2 kinds of grades. There were straight A's and failure to appreciate the sacrifices that we as a family are making for you. Those were the 2 types of grades. So I was raised that education is the thing, the way that you lift yourself up. And I firmly believe that. But in the neighborhood that I grew up in, everybody went to the local public school. It was Roosevelt High School was the name of it. And it was a glorified stop on the school to prison pipeline in 1986. And as near as I can tell, that remains, if it's even still there, if it hasn't been eliminated completely, it would still be that. And that's 36 years later. So it's a system. The current system traps mostly lower income and minority students in schools that sometimes are failing schools.
We asked how school choice features in his vision.
So over COVID, these last couple of years, what you've seen is there are some people who have school choice. I mean, if you're above a certain income level, right, you have school choice. And, that first year, those first few months, everybody just kind of hunkered down where they were. But then when it became clear that this COVID thing was not actually just going to be a couple months long, and we were going into a whole new school year, potentially with lockdowns and masks and all that kind of stuff, lots of families who had the financial means simply exercised financial school choice and moved their kids into private schools that were now going to be in person, or sent their kids to like Idaho to schools where they were open and meeting in person. And all the lower income kids were stuck where they were.
Is school choice for everyone?
It doesn't make sense to me that school choice exists for some people and not for others. And so I'm absolutely interested in the idea of education savings accounts, a sort of similar thing where the money goes in there, and then you as a parent are deciding where to send your kid.
Won't people attack this as not public education?
I'm a big believer in the value of public education. I know sometimes when people, there do exist folks who push school choice primarily because they don't believe that public education should even exist as a thing. Like,
Yeah.
I know people are in that place, and I understand that point of view. I think it's, there are some intellectually consistent reasons why you might believe that. But I personally actually believe that universal, access to public education is a good thing and that we should have it. But that doesn't mean that every individual school needs to survive as it exists today, because some of them are categorically failing schools.
How does competition make schools better?
So offering that choice to parents, I think that sort of competitive pressure will allow kids to get out of schools that are failing, and will create the sort of conditions and incentives to help schools really focus on becoming better. So we've essentially tried not doing that for a very, very long time, and we've made zero progress on the deeply intractable difference between how kids perform based on which public schools they're in. And so since nothing we've done so far has worked, why don't we try a new approach? Again, I think it's an opportunity for us as a party to say we want to do it constructively. We're not trying to get rid of public education. We just want to introduce the incentives and the freedom to move kids around so that we can actually get to some progress on that equity issue of the quality of education kids get based on which school they're in.
Gus on San Mateo.
Sure. So I think there's I think what's sort of front and center in people's minds right now is probably things like crime, homelessness, education for sure, just going through COVID for the last couple of years. Inflation is obviously on people's minds, and I think in each of those issues, there's an opportunity to talk about how things might be better if we had a little bit more competitive balance between the parties, in this state. On the inflation side, for instance, first of all, I'm willing to give a pass on gas prices given what's going on in Russia right now. That obviously impacts a global oil market, and I think we haven't gotten into World War III yet, and Ukraine is still kind of holding out. So I think the policy so far has been okay. Like I don't have big quibbles with it. But even if you subtract out the gas and the food prices, inflation was 6.2%. Right before the kind of latest stuff going on over in Russia and Ukraine. So, and that's the highest it's been since 1980. And if you kind of look over the last couple of years as we went through COVID, when COVID first sort of happened, we had a bunch of bills that were bipartisan bills. We had 3 of them in March, including one that was 2.2 trillion, bipartisan. Everybody got together. We said, obviously, we're going to be going through something pretty rough here. Let's, if we got to spend money, let's spend money. Everybody went along. We did it. Toward the end of that year, the end of 2020, did a second round. Now, the Democratic Party wanted to spend a lot more than we did. So there had to be some negotiations. Eventually, though, spent another 900 billion, which is not nothing. I mean, 900 billion, it's like,
it's real money.
That's real money. Even at the federal level, that is real money.
Yeah.
But again, bipartisan. But then when the Democrats won the election and Joe Biden was inaugurated and all that, they said, okay, now we want to do another one. And we said, well, we just did a 900 billion one, like just a few months ago. And by that point, the economy was already like the trend was already looking like this on economic growth. The unemployment rate was doing this. So we got, economy's growing, unemployment rate is coming down, and, in looking pretty solidly in both of those directions. And we said, listen, if you pump another, however many trillions of dollars into this thing while the economy's growing, there's a huge risk of inflation. And the Democratic Party said, yeah, but we really want to do it. And now that we're running the House and the Senate and the presidency, we could just do a reconciliation bill and kind of do it without you.
Yep.
And so that's what they did. And now here we are a year later, and inflation's 6%. So, that to me is what happens when you allow policy to be completely one-sided. And that's that was like one instance of it at the federal level. Here in the state of California, it's been that way for basically a decade.
Right.
And that I think is, has manifested itself in things like inflation, some things like, like the crime uptick that, one of the things that went into that as well. That's, the motivation was we don't want as many people in the, incarcerated, which I, as somebody who loves freedom, I don't want to see mass numbers of people incarcerated for all kinds of reasons. But the Democratic Party's solution to that was, okay, so we just won't like prosecute anything below $950. And so you basically just made stealing up to $950 free. And if you make it free, like what are people going to do? They're just going to do more of it, which is exactly what happened. Versus, if you had a Republican Party a little bit more involved in the policymaking, we could have suggested something like, well, maybe instead of incarcerating people, if you steal things, you 2 hours under house arrest with one of those little ankle things, so you're not in prison, but for every dollar that if you stole $200 worth of stuff, that's 400 hours you're under house arrest with a little ankle thing. Now there's a consequence for doing what you did, but we still achieve the goal of not mass incarcerating people.
Yep.
There was a middle ground somewhere between doing nothing and putting everybody in jail that we could have explored if we'd been working together as two parties. But again, one-sided policy. I don't fault their motivation, but that was not I think a particularly good way to execute that motivation. And we could have had a better execution if there'd been more balance. So as I go around talking to folks in San Mateo County, I'm like, I'm not asking anybody to change their political identity. I'm not asking anybody to change kind of where you are on issues. I'm just asking you to think about, won't things be a little better if there's a little bit more competitive balance? And by the way, some of the things that I'm talking about here are things that are also going to try to deliver the goals that you have. I just want to get there in a conservative way. And I think that there's actually, that message is actually resonating. So I think there is going to be like a much more interesting result in this election than we've had in, certainly in this race over the last several cycles.
Great. You mentioned crime and public safety. Thoughts on the brand of conservatism that you're offering up? What are some of the possibilities in the realm of public safety? Public safety is a big topic, not just in San Mateo, so we dug in.
Yeah, I think of it as compassion with consequences, kind of going back to that example of, the compassion piece. So our party, I think, sometimes overemphasizes the consequences part.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party overemphasizes the compassion part, which is why you need them in competitive balance, because then you get that balance of compassion with consequences. So yes, let's not throw somebody into deep prison for stealing $250 worth of stuff. Okay, fine. Like that seems reasonable. Like I don't want to put somebody in San Quentin for that.
Right.
But I also don't want there to be no consequence for doing that, because then everybody's going to just go and do that. So let's find that middle ground where maybe it's some kind of house arrest kind of thing. That's the balance of compassion with consequences.
What does compassion with consequences look like for immigration?
How do we do that? How do we sort of approach border security and immigration reform and a pathway to citizenship with that kind of lens? My father was an immigrant to this country, but he jumped through the hoops for something close to 8 years to get his citizenship. And the truth is, there are many millions of immigrants in this country, the vast majority of whom also jump through all the hoops. I was having lunch at the Denny's down in Redwood City the other day, and Oscar was my server, and I was just asking him, I said, I'm running for Congress. I would love to just kind of hear, what would you want your congressman to be working on? And he said, I've been in the immigration process for 5 years now, and but my family's still in Mexico, and because I'm in the middle of the process, I can't go and see them. He's like, so I haven't seen because if I go, then I can't come back.
Yep.
Still in the middle of the process. He's like, if someone could just make it possible for me, he's like, I don't mind that it takes as long as it takes, but don't make it impossible for me to see my family while I go through the process. I said, that sounds like a reasonable request to me.
Yeah.
We're going to have the process take 8 years. I don't want you to miss your kid's entire childhood to go through the process. So either either we say it just takes 8 years to make up our minds, although I don't know why it takes 8 years for us to make up our minds. But if it does, fine. But then yes, like make it possible for people to see their families. Or let's think about how we, if we need to invest more in the process in order to kind of get people through it a little faster, I'm certainly open to that possibility.
We asked Gus about the media.
I've had great relationships with the local media here. Half Moon Bay Review, the Skyline View, San Mateo Daily Journal. I'm meeting with Palo Alto Daily News next week. Like it's, everybody's been extremely fair, very much willing to give me a hearing, but it's all local. You know what I mean? I think the national news has kind of a different, they have sort of settled mentally on the idea that the pathway to profit is outrage generation. And what we have to do is change that calculus for them. And the only way to change that calculus really is for us as consumers to say, I'm not going to consume that if that's what you're going to offer. Like you have to offer me something better than that. That involves, I think, kind of convincing folks en masse to make some different choices about where they're kind of deriving where they're sort of consuming their media.
Yep. Finally, we asked Gus what it means to him to be an American.
It is a place where, because it is a place I think where you can live your own truth, where you can, again, you and I don't have to view things the same way, and we can still we can enjoy each other's company. We can both just live our lives. That's a historical anomaly. In most of human history, you lived in a society where there was a top-down way that things were going to be, and you had to conform to that, or else you'd be banished or killed. Period.
Yep.
That's human existence for most of history. What we've built, the society we've built here, where you have people from every different religion, every different ethnicity, all living together in relative peace. It's got a little fractious recently, which is part of why I want to get into politics and kind of move us back to where I think our true roots are as a country. That is a place where we can all just live together peacefully. We're not 1990s Rwanda with Hutus and Tutsis like chopping each other up with machetes. We're not 1990s Serbia, the Serbs and Croats and Muslims and everybody like shooting at each other. We've managed to build a society that has a real level of diversity to it that is truly, I think, unique in human history. And so I'm proud to be part of that society. I want to make that society even stronger. I do believe that more people around the world hunger for that. And when if we kind of take care of our brand, it provides a beacon of hope, the sort of city on the hill that Reagan talked about. It provides something that's really important psychologically for people around the world who don't live in a society like ours, but aspire to one day do so, either by coming here or by changing their own societies. So that, I think, is that America is a good country with its heart in the right place. That sort of articulated some really lofty aspirations in its founding documents that are extremely radical in that sense, because nothing like that had ever existed. Have we ever truly perfectly achieved those aspirations? No, of course not. We haven't ever, fully achieved them. But over time, we've gotten better at it. And I think it's possible to sort of hold those two ideas at the same time in your mind. On the one hand, we are a nation whose heart is in the right place, that aspires to great things, and that is in fact making progress toward that, while at the same time it's obviously not there yet and still has work to do. And and I'm happy to work with people across the political spectrum to kind of keep us moving down the path of getting closer and closer to achieving that place where everybody's created equal and everyone has kind of the same basic kind of set of opportunities, and then everybody lives their lives as they see fit.